They say wars don't just forge weapons, they reshape how we see the world. Few machines warped American thinking as violently as the Mitsubishi. A6M Zero, born in a Japan preparing its expansion in near silence. The Zero wasn't designed to win beauty contests or hang in museums. It was built for one cold purpose: to dominate the skies of the Pacific before the enemy even knew the fight had started. Its story is not just about planes and pilots, but about perception, fear, and the brutal clarity of engineering choices in wartime. The Zero did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a shadow featherlight in structure, tuned to razor-edge performance. It relied not on armor, but on avoidance. On the pilot's skill and the airplane's uncanny agility, its philosophy flew in the face of Western ideas about survivability. When US flyers first encountered it in 1941, they didn't see a miracle. They saw something that broke every rule they thought they understood about fighter design. It was sleek, merciless, and frighteningly efficient. That initial confusion shaped everything. To the American mindset of 1941, used to sturdier, more protected machines, a plane with no armor, no self-sealing tanks, and a skeleton so lean it seemed delicate simply shouldn't have worked. Yet it did, and in the opening months of the Pacific War, it worked terrifyingly well. Ships, airfields, and carriers were caught off guard by its dominance, and the reports that returned were filled with awe, disbelief, and sometimes outright panic. Across the skies of the Philippines, Wake, and Malaya, the Zero performed maneuvers that seemed to defy practical physics. It could roll and bank with a fluidity that made Allied fighters look ponderous. It could hold tight, low-speed turns that sucked adversaries into energy traps. It could climb and loiter at ranges that challenged carrier doctrine. Reports poured back in language rarely used in combat reports. Ethereal, ghost-like, fluid. Pilots who had trained against textbooks and flight manuals suddenly found themselves facing a machine that seemed to anticipate their moves. American pilots, conditioned to machines that absorbed hits and punished mistakes, began to mythologize the Zero. Stories spread that it was indestructible, that it climbed without cost, that it never lost energy. But those tales mistook cause for effect. The Zero's agility was not magical. It was the result of ruthless design trade-offs. To gain range and maneuver, Japanese engineers stripped weight, minimal armor, light frames, thin fuel tanks. That weight saving created a fighter that danced like a blade until it was struck, and then it could be deadly fragile. The truth began to bleed through with the first hard intelligence. The day a nearly intact Zero came down on Akutan Island in Alaska was a turning point. United States technicians recovered and repaired the aircraft, then flew it with a cold, clinical purpose: to map its strengths and, more importantly, its weaknesses. Every bolt, spar, and control surface was analyzed to uncover the limits of this seemingly unbeatable fighter. What they found was both simple and devastating. The Zero's strength in turning and range was undeniable, but outside its comfort zone, it showed glaring flaws. At high speeds, its control surfaces stiffened. In steep dives, its structure and ailerons suffered. Its lack of armor left the pilot exposed and fuel tanks vulnerable to catastrophic fire. And the very lightness that granted extraordinary maneuverability made the airframe brittle under damage. In short, the Zero was a specialist, lethal in certain envelopes, fragile outside them. Once that specialist profile was understood, American tactics changed, fast and ruthlessly. The romantic idea of beating the Zero in a graceful dogfight was abandoned. New doctrine emphasized energy tactics. Use altitude and speed, attack from above, make one hard pass and then break away. Don't trade turning performance, trade energy. Pilots were trained to use boom and zoom attacks, exploiting dives and slashing passes that forced the Zero out of its low-speed sweet spot. Discipline and mutual support replaced improvisation. The battle space became less a ballroom and more a scalpel. The capture and study of the Akutan Zero did more than tweak tactics. It spurred design and production choices that would reshape American fighters. The F-6F Hellcat, the F-4U Corsair, and even tactics suited to the P-38 Lightning were not accidental evolutions. They were answers to the problem the Zero posed. The Hellcat, for instance, was designed with the explicit aim of countering the Zero. Heavier, tougher, more powerful, and capable of absorbing damage and returning home, the Corsair brought speed and punch that negated Japan's advantages. Aircraft and doctrine evolved as a single, cohesive system. Once the myth evaporated, industrial might and design philosophy moved to fill the gap. This whole arc, doctrine, from terror to intelligence to counter-design, is where the real American story of the Zero lives. The US did not simply learn how to shoot a better bullet. It learned how to integrate analysis, training, and manufacturing into a response that broke the Zero's dominance. What began as awe turned into respect, then into cold calculation. The Zero was admired for what it achieved within its paradigm, but it was not invincible. There is a bitter irony in that truth. An aircraft designed to give Japan the early psychological edge actually forced the United States to accelerate its own technical and tactical revolutions. The Zero compelled rapid innovation, higher horsepower engines, sturdier airframes, revised gunnery, and formation tactics. And those innovations, once fielded, turned the tide of the Pacific War. It was a catalyst, shaping entire programs of aircraft, pilot training, and combat doctrine. Picture a quiet moment in 1943. A captured Zero sits on a sun-washed tarmac, panels open for inspection. Mechanics run fingers along ribs and spars, not in wonder, but in professional curiosity. A pilot walks around the machine, pauses and says, "This is what made us think it was unbeatable." A mechanic, oil on his hands, answers simply, "It's not magic. It's design." That exchange captures everything. The Zero was not a supernatural adversary, it was a deliberate, brilliant solution to a defined problem, one with trade-offs that, once understood, could be exploited. Beyond tactics and machines, the Zero reshaped American understanding of warfare itself. It revealed the dangers of underestimating an adversary, of misreading innovation, and of allowing myth to cloud judgment. It forced the US military to rethink training, to design fighters with a new philosophy, protection, power, and energy management, while still valuing agility. In the end, what America thought of the Zero evolved from myth to method. It began as fear, matured into comprehension, and finished as a lesson in the limits of specialization. The Zero remains, to this day, an icon of engineering audacity, a machine that achieved extraordinary performance by accepting extraordinary risk. Its legacy is twofold, a testament to focused design and a reminder that in warfare, as in engineering, advantage in one domain always carries a cost in another.